The dust settled on Main Street like a blanket of forgotten dreams, coating everything in the small frontier town of Cedar Ridge with the same dull brown that seemed to match Martha Hayes' existence. She swept the wooden steps of Henderson's General Store for the third time that morning, her worn dress catching on splinters that had been there since before she started working 2 years ago. At 24, Martha had already been labeled an old maid by the gossiping wives who gathered outside the church each Sunday, their whispered conversations falling silent whenever she passed. Martha's hands were rough from years of scrubbing floors, washing dishes, and mending clothes for anyone willing to pay a few coins. Her auburn hair, though naturally beautiful, was always pulled back in a severe bun, and her dresses were hand-me-downs from the charity barrel behind Reverend Morrison's church. She had learned long ago that hope was a luxury she couldn't afford, especially when it came to matters of the heart. The town's eligible bachelors had long since chosen wives from among the daughters of successful merchants and ranchers. Martha's father had died in a mining accident when she was 16, leaving behind nothing but debts and a reputation for drinking away his sorrows. Her mother had passed the following winter from consumption, and Martha had been alone ever since, surviving on the kindness of strangers and her own determination to make an honest living. Every morning, she would walk past the white picket fences and well-tended gardens of the married women, watching through windows as they prepared breakfast for their families. She would see children running through yards, their laughter echoing off the mountains that surrounded Cedar Ridge like ancient sentinels. These glimpses of domestic happiness served as daily reminders of everything she believed she would never have. The bell above Henderson's door chimed as old Mrs. Patterson shuffled inside, her cane tapping against the wooden floor. Martha quickly set aside her broom and hurried to help the elderly woman find the supplies she needed. Mrs. Patterson had always been kind to Martha, treating her with the respect that others in town seemed to withhold. "Martha, dear," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice gentle but concerned, "I heard tell there's a new rancher come to town. Bought the old Morrison spread up in the hills. Folks say he's looking for help fixing up the place." She paused, studying Martha's face carefully. "Might be worth asking about work. A young woman like you shouldn't have to scrub floors her whole life." Martha felt a familiar flutter of hope, quickly suppressed by years of disappointment. "Thank you for telling me, Mrs. Patterson. I'll consider it." But even as she spoke the words, she doubted she would have the courage to approach a stranger about work. Men in town either ignored her completely or looked at her with a mixture of pity and disdain. That evening, Martha sat in her small room above the bakery, the space barely large enough for a bed and a washstand. She had saved every penny she could over the past 2 years, keeping her money hidden in a small tin box under a loose floorboard. It wasn't much, but it represented the possibility of someday leaving Cedar Ridge and starting fresh somewhere no one knew her story. As she counted the coins by candlelight, Martha allowed herself a moment to imagine a different life. Perhaps in a big city like Denver or San Francisco, she could find work as a seamstress or a governess. She had taught herself to read and write by borrowing books from the church library, and she had always been good with a needle. But even as she dreamed, the practical part of her mind reminded her that a single woman traveling alone faced dangers she wasn't prepared to handle. The next morning brought unexpected excitement to Cedar Ridge's quiet streets. Word spread quickly that the new rancher would be in town to hire workers and buy supplies. Martha watched from the store window as men gathered outside the saloon, hoping to catch the stranger's attention. She had almost forgotten about Mrs. Patterson's suggestion when the door chimed and a tall figure stepped inside. Thomas Tom Sullivan stood just over 6 feet, with shoulders broadened by years of hard work and hands that spoke of a man who wasn't afraid of honest labor. His hat was worn but well cared for, and his clothes, while not fancy, were clean and mended. When he removed his hat, Martha saw hair the color of wheat and eyes the deep blue of a mountain lake. What struck her most, however, was the kindness in those eyes and the way he nodded respectfully to her before addressing Mr. Henderson. "I'm looking to hire some help," Tom said, his voice carrying a slight accent that suggested he hadn't always lived in Colorado. "Need folks who aren't afraid of hard work and can help me get the ranch ready for winter. Fair wages for fair work." Mr. Henderson scratched his graying beard thoughtfully. "Well now, most of the able-bodied men in town already have work. Might be slim pickings, but I'll spread the word." His eyes briefly glanced toward Martha before returning to Tom. Course, there's different kinds of work that need doing on a ranch. Cooking, cleaning, mending, that sort of thing. Tom followed Henderson's gaze and found himself looking directly at Martha. She felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment, certain that her appearance would mark her immediately as unsuitable for any kind of employment. But instead of the dismissive look she expected, Tom's expression remained thoughtful and respectful. "Ma'am," he said, addressing her directly, "would you be interested in discussing work? I need someone reliable to help with the house and cooking. It's honest work with fair pay and a decent place to live." Martha's heart hammered against her ribs. The practical voice in her head screamed warnings about the impropriety of a single woman living and working alone with a bachelor, but a stronger voice whispered that this might be her only chance at a better life. Yes, sir, I would be interested in hearing more about the position." Tom smiled, and Martha noticed that it reached his eyes, creating small lines that suggested he smiled often. "Would this evening be suitable? I'm staying at the boarding house until I can get the ranch house livable. We could discuss the details over supper, if that would be appropriate." Mrs. Henderson, who had been listening from behind the counter, cleared her throat meaningfully. "Might be more proper if you discussed business matters here in the store, where folks can see everything's above board." Tom nodded immediately. "Of course. Would 6 o'clock this evening work for you, ma'am?" Martha managed to find her voice long enough to agree, and Tom tipped his hat before leaving to continue his errands. The moment he was gone, Martha felt the weight of every stare in the store. She could practically hear the thoughts racing through the minds of the other customers. What could that man possibly want with Martha Hayes? Surely he doesn't know about her family's reputation. The afternoon crawled by with agonizing slowness. Martha tried to focus on her work, but her mind kept returning to the conversation ahead. What if Tom Sullivan withdrew his offer once he learned more about her background? What if this was all some kind of cruel joke? She had learned not to trust in good fortune, as it had never lasted long in her experience. At precisely 6 o'clock, Tom returned to the store. He had taken the time to clean up and change his shirt, which Martha noticed and appreciated. They sat at a small table near the window, where anyone passing by could see their conversation was purely business. "I bought the Morrison Ranch about a month ago," Tom began, his voice steady and sincere. "It's been empty for 2 years, so there's a fair amount of work to be done. The house needs a woman's touch, if you don't mind me saying so, and I'm not much of a cook beyond beans and hardtack." Martha found herself relaxing slightly as Tom described the work. It sounded challenging but honest, and the wages he mentioned were more than she currently earned at the store. More importantly, he spoke to her as though her opinion mattered, asking about her experience with different household tasks and listening carefully to her responses. "I should be honest with you, Mr. Sullivan," Martha finally said, gathering her courage. "I don't have the best reputation in this town. My father, he wasn't a good man, and people tend to judge me by his mistakes. If you're looking to hire someone who will enhance your standing in the community, you might want to look elsewhere." Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying her face with those thoughtful blue eyes. When he spoke, his voice carried a conviction that surprised Martha with its intensity. "Miss Hayes, I've learned that a person's worth isn't determined by their family's mistakes or their financial circumstances. What matters is their character and their willingness to work hard and treat others with respect. From what I've observed and heard today, you possess both qualities in abundance." Martha felt tears prick at her eyes. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to her with such respect and kindness that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be valued as a human being. "There's something else I should mention," Tom continued, his tone becoming more serious. "The ranch is a good hour's ride from town, and winter weather can make that trip impossible sometimes. You'd need to be comfortable with the isolation and—" He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Well, there might be talk about a single woman working for a bachelor. I want to make sure you're prepared for that." Martha had already considered this problem, and she surprised herself by answering without hesitation. "Mr. Sullivan, I've been the subject of town gossip my entire life. I've learned that people will talk regardless of what I do or don't do. If I can earn honest wages doing honest work, I'm not going to let other people's opinions stop me." Tom's smile returned, broader this time. "In that case, Miss Hayes, I'd be honored to have you work for me. When would you be able to start?" They agreed that Martha would give Mr. Henderson 2 weeks' notice, and then move out to the ranch. Tom promised to have the house ready for her arrival and to set up a proper bedroom with a lock on the door, demonstrating his understanding of her need for security and privacy. As they shook hands to seal the agreement, Martha felt something she hadn't experienced in years: genuine hope for the future. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and contemplating flight. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of preparation and gossip. News of Martha's new employment spread through Cedar Ridge like wildfire, generating reactions that ranged from shock to disapproval to genuine happiness on the part of the few people who truly cared about her welfare. Mrs. Patterson, bless her soul, came by the store several times to offer advice and even gave Martha a small collection of herbs and medicines for emergencies. "You're a good girl," Martha, the elderly woman, said on her final visit. "Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. Sometimes life sends us opportunities disguised as risks, and it takes courage to recognize the difference." On the morning of her departure, Martha packed her few belongings into a single carpet bag and said goodbye to the small room that had been her home for 2 years. Tom arrived precisely when he had promised, driving a sturdy wagon loaded with supplies. He had dressed carefully for the occasion and greeted her with the same respectful kindness he had shown during their first meeting. The ride to the ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country Martha had ever seen. The road wound through valleys painted gold and red by autumn aspens, crossed crystal clear streams, and climbed gradually toward the towering peaks that dominated the western horizon. Tom proved to be an easy companion, pointing out landmarks and sharing stories about the area's history without pressuring her to make conversation when she seemed content to simply observe the landscape. The Morrison Ranch sat in a natural meadow surrounded by pine forests, with the main house positioned to take advantage of morning sun and afternoon shade. The building was larger than Martha had expected, built from local timber and stone with a wide front porch that invited visitors to sit and enjoy the mountain views. Tom had clearly spent considerable time and effort preparing for her arrival. The house was clean, the windows sparkled, and smoke rose from the chimney, promising warmth inside. "I know it's not much compared to the grand houses back east," Tom said as he helped her down from the wagon, "but it's solid and comfortable. I hope you'll find it suitable." Martha stood in the yard, breathing the clean mountain air and feeling something inside her chest expand with possibility. "It's beautiful, Mr. Sullivan, more beautiful than any place I ever imagined living." Tom showed her through the house, explaining the improvements he had made and pointing out areas that still needed attention. Her bedroom was spacious and bright, with a comfortable bed, a wardrobe, and a small desk positioned near the window. True to his word, the door had a sturdy lock, and Tom made a point of giving her the only key. "I want you to feel safe here," he said simply. "This is your home now for as long as you want it to be." Over the following weeks, Martha threw herself into her new responsibilities with an enthusiasm that surprised even her. She scrubbed and organized every corner of the house, planted a small herb garden near the kitchen door, and began preparing meals that were far more elaborate than Tom's bachelor fare. She discovered that she enjoyed cooking when she had access to quality ingredients and someone who appreciated her efforts. Tom, for his part, proved to be an ideal employer. He treated her with consistent respect, never making demands that went beyond their agreed-upon arrangement, and always thanked her for her work. He was also an excellent neighbor, helping her repair things around the house, teaching her to identify edible plants in the surrounding forest, and sharing his extensive knowledge of ranching and farming. As autumn progressed toward winter, Martha began to understand why Tom had been concerned about isolation. Snow fell early and often, sometimes cutting them off from town for days at a time. But instead of feeling trapped, Martha found herself appreciating the peaceful quiet of the ranch and the simple rhythm of daily life. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't constantly worried about money, gossip, or her next meal. More surprisingly, she found herself looking forward to the evenings when she and Tom would sit by the fire, reading or simply talking about their respective days. Tom was well educated and widely traveled, having worked on ranches from Texas to Montana before settling in Colorado. He told fascinating stories about his adventures, but he was also an excellent listener, showing genuine interest in Martha's thoughts and opinions about everything from book recommendations to ideas for improving the ranch. It was during one of these evening conversations, about 6 weeks after Martha's arrival, that she finally asked the question that had been nagging at her since their first meeting. "Mr. Sullivan, can I ask you something personal?" "Of course. And please call me Tom. I think we've moved beyond formal titles, don't you?" Martha smiled, still amazed by how easy it had become to smile in Tom's presence. "Tom, then. I've been wondering why a successful rancher like yourself hasn't married. You're clearly capable of supporting a family, and you're—" She felt herself blushing but pressed on. "Well, you're a good man. Surely there have been women who would be interested in marrying you." Tom was quiet for so long that Martha began to worry she had overstepped some invisible boundary. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a sadness that she hadn't heard before. "There was someone, back in Kansas. Her name was Elizabeth, and we were engaged to be married. She was beautiful and educated, everything a man could want in a wife." He stared into the fire, his expression distant. 2 weeks before our wedding, she ran away with a traveling salesman who promised her a more exciting life in San Francisco. Left me a letter explaining that she couldn't bear the thought of being stuck on a ranch for the rest of her life. Martha felt a surge of anger on Tom's behalf. How could any woman be so foolish as to abandon a man like him? "I'm sorry," she said softly. "That must have been devastating." Tom looked up and met her eyes. "It was, for a while, but I learned something important from that experience. Beauty and social standing don't guarantee happiness or loyalty. What matters is finding someone who shares your values and wants to build a life with you. Not someone who's looking for you to provide entertainment or excitement." Something in the way he looked at her when he said this made Martha's heart skip, but she quickly dismissed the thought. She was reading too much into his words, letting her growing feelings for Tom cloud her judgment. As winter deepened, Martha found herself facing an unexpected problem. She was falling in love with her employer. Tom's kindness, intelligence, and integrity had gradually worn down the walls she had built around her heart, and she caught herself watching him with an intensity that had nothing to do with their professional relationship. The realization terrified her. Tom had shown her nothing but respect and friendship, never giving any indication that he viewed her as anything more than a capable employee. She was still the poor, lonely woman that no one in Cedar Ridge had wanted to marry, and Tom Sullivan was educated, successful, and handsome enough to attract any woman he chose. It was foolish to imagine that he might develop romantic feelings for someone like her. But love, Martha discovered, wasn't something she could control through logic and common sense. Despite her best efforts to maintain emotional distance, she found herself treasuring every shared smile, every casual touch of hands when he helped her with something, every moment of easy conversation by the fireplace. Christmas approached with a heavy snowfall that ensured they would spend the holiday alone at the ranch. Martha had never particularly enjoyed Christmas, as it had always served as a stark reminder of her isolation and poverty. But this year felt different. She found herself looking forward to creating a celebration, even if it would be just the two of them. She spent days preparing special foods and decorating the house with pine boughs and holly berries gathered from the surrounding forest. Tom contributed by cutting down a small evergreen tree, which they decorated with paper ornaments Martha made from old books and magazines. On Christmas Eve, they sat by the fire after a dinner of roast chicken, sweet potatoes, and apple pie. Snow fell steadily outside the windows, creating a cocoon of warmth and intimacy inside the house. Tom had surprised Martha with a gift of beautiful leather-bound journal and a set of fine writing instruments. "I thought you might enjoy having a place to record your thoughts and experiences," he explained when she protested that she had nothing comparable to give him in return. "You have a way with words, Martha, and I think you should trust yourself to put them on paper." Martha was so moved by his thoughtfulness that she had to turn away to hide her tears. No one had ever given her such a meaningful gift, and the fact that Tom had noticed her love of reading and writing made the present even more precious. "I do have something for you," she said, retrieving a small package from behind the tree. "It's not much, but I made it myself." Tom unwrapped the gift carefully, revealing a pair of wool mittens that Martha had knitted during the long evenings when he was out doing chores. She had used yarn purchased with her own savings, and every stitch represented hours of work by candlelight. "Martha, these are beautiful," Tom said, examining the intricate pattern she had worked into the wool. "I can't remember the last time someone made something specifically for me. Thank you." The gratitude in his voice was so genuine that Martha felt her careful emotional restraint beginning to crumble. When Tom reached over to squeeze her hand in thanks, she found herself looking directly into his eyes and seeing something there that she had hardly dared to hope for. "Martha," Tom said softly, his hand still holding hers. "There's something I need to tell you." Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain he could hear it, but she managed to nod encouragingly. "When I hired you, it was because I needed help with the house and because you seemed like a decent, hard-working person. But over these past few months, you've become so much more than an employee. You've made this house a home and He paused, seeming to struggle for the right words. "You've shown me what it means to share a life with someone who truly understands the value of simple, honest happiness." Martha felt tears spilling down her cheeks, but she couldn't bring herself to speak for fear of breaking the spell. "I know I have no right to hope for more than friendship from you," Tom continued. "I'm just a rancher with calloused hands and simple dreams. But if there's any chance that you might consider, that you might be willing to think about making this arrangement permanent, in every sense of the word." "Yes," Martha whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, Tom, I would be honored to marry you." Tom's face transformed with joy and relief. He stood and pulled Martha gently to her feet, holding both of her hands in his larger ones. "Are you certain? I know this isn't the kind of romantic courtship you deserve, and I know people will say things about our circumstances. But I love you, Martha Hayes. I love your strength and your kindness, and your determination to make the best of whatever life gives you. I want to spend the rest of my life showing you how much you're worth." Martha couldn't speak through her tears, so she answered by stepping forward and allowing Tom to wrap her in his arms. For the first time in her life, she felt truly safe, truly valued, and truly loved for exactly who she was. They were married 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Reverend Morrison performing the service and Mrs. Patterson serving as witness. Most of the town chose not to attend, but Martha found that their absence didn't diminish her joy in the slightest. She wore a simple blue dress that Tom had surprised her with, claiming that the color matched her eyes perfectly. As they exchanged vows in front of the fireplace, where they had spent so many comfortable evenings, Martha reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a lonely spinster scrubbing floors and expecting nothing from life but continued solitude. Now she was promising to love and honor a man who had seen past her poverty and reputation to recognize the woman she truly was inside. The years that followed brought their share of challenges and hardships, as frontier life always did. There were harsh winters, failed crops, sick cattle, and financial struggles that tested their resolve. But Martha and Tom faced each obstacle as partners, supporting each other through difficulties and celebrating together during times of abundance. Martha discovered that she had a natural talent for managing ranch finances and dealing with suppliers, skills that proved invaluable as Tom expanded their operations. She also found joy in creating a true home, complete with flower gardens, a vegetable patch, and eventually, the sounds of children's laughter echoing through the rooms. Their first son was born 2 years after their marriage, followed by twin daughters and another son. Martha marveled at how different her children's lives were from her own childhood. They grew up knowing they were loved and valued, secure in their parents' affection and confident in their own worth. As the children grew older and began families of their own, Martha often found herself reflecting on the chain of events that had led to her happiness. If Mrs. Patterson hadn't mentioned the new rancher, if Martha hadn't found the courage to consider Tom's job offer, if Tom hadn't possessed the wisdom to see beyond social conventions to recognize her true character, her life might have remained forever unchanged. The town of Cedar Ridge eventually grew into a small city, and the gossips who had once whispered about Martha Hayes became grandmothers who pointed to Martha Sullivan as an example of how love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The general store where she had once swept floors became a thriving business district, and the small ranch house where Tom had first offered her employment expanded into a prosperous family compound. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Tom surprised Martha with a return trip to the original house, which they had preserved exactly as it was during their first winter together. They spent the evening sitting by the same fireplace where they had fallen in love, reading aloud from the journal Tom had given her that first Christmas. Martha's entries chronicled not just the events of their life together, but her gradual transformation from a woman who believed herself unworthy of love to someone who understood that true happiness came not from external circumstances, but from the courage to accept love when it was offered and the wisdom to nurture it once found. Do you ever regret it? Tom asked as they watched the fire burn low, giving up the possibility of city life or a more conventional romance. Martha smiled and took his weathered hand in hers, noticing how perfectly they fit together after all these years. How could I regret finding everything I never dared to dream I could have? You didn't just marry me, Tom. You taught me that I was worth marrying. You showed me that poverty and loneliness weren't permanent conditions, but temporary circumstances that could be overcome with love and determination. As snow began to fall outside the windows, just as it had on their first Christmas together, Martha felt the deep contentment that comes from a life lived authentically and fully. She had learned that sometimes the greatest transformations begin not with dramatic gestures or sudden revelations, but with the simple decision to trust in the possibility of something better. The poor, lonely woman who had swept floors in Cedar Ridge still existed within her, but she no longer defined Martha's identity. Instead, she served as a reminder of how far the human spirit could travel when guided by love, supported by partnership, and strengthened by the knowledge that everyone deserves a chance at happiness, regardless of where their journey begins.